Welcome to the Love, Law, and Life Makeover Podcast, a go-to for hope, faith, and joy in changing your life. I'm Neil Presley Cox, lawyer, speaker, and author of Hope Lines. I have an easy-to-find website, neilpresleycox.com. You can't miss it. And a nice welcome for my presenter and co-host, Kelsy Gibbs.
So today's chapter is on domestically nonviolent. The legal system casts a wide net. Neil, do you want to just give us an overview of this chapter?
This is probably the most legal story of all the ones that I wrote. Domestically Nonviolent is about the system overreaching, the domestic violence system overreaching. You have a lady who isn't violent, who doesn't have a record, gets into an argument with her husband. They go outside and she does little more than grab him and maybe a light shove, not a punch in the face, not a kick, not hitting somebody with a stick, not even a scratch or a slap across the face, just a nudge maybe. Somebody else sees this, calls the police, and many states, this one included Washington, has a mandatory domestic violence arrest policy where you have probable cause that a so-called assault happened, so the police arrest her, charge her with domestic violence assault, and she is just in major distress and wants this just to go away, and it doesn't take much for the system to convince her to just plead guilty and it'll all be over with and you won't have to go to jail either. So she pleads guilty, not fully realizing she'll have that domestic violence label attached to her name for years. And with that comes certain things, most notably the loss of firearm rights. But in addition to that, it can affect your ability to work in the medical field, other jobs. You are then labeled as somebody that victimizes people in your household physically. So it's a tremendously bad label to have. And when she realizes that this has a lot of what I call collateral consequences, she's just extremely angry and upset and feels like the system let her down. So I do think it's one of those where a little consultation early on with a lawyer goes a long way.
Yeah, because she had
you're fading out on the volume.
Oh, am I? Let's see, is that better?
Yeah, it's still kind of quiet, but it's a little better.
It's a little quiet.
There you go.
Is that better? Okay.
Yeah.
So I thought it was interesting because the prosecutor gave her options, right? She could ask, hire an attorney, one could be assigned to her, or she could have a consultation. Was it a consultation?
She could just talk to the prosecutor to try to resolve things, right?
Mm-hmm. And like you had said, if she had just been, hey, at least talk to the person, the lawyer who would be assigned to her. Is that what, I guess, if you were in that situation, what would you say would be the proper response to that?
If I'm in a situation where there's serious consequences and I don't know the answer to something, I like to go to the source of very good information. So I recommend to people that if they're at all able to, at least have that initial meeting with a lawyer. Try to find a good lawyer, ask people that you know if they know of any local lawyer that did a really good job for them. Try to use your instincts when you're meeting with a lawyer to get a feel if this is a person that seems to know what they're doing and seems to be engaged and care about your situation. But you have that initial meeting with a lawyer and ask them what they think of the situation. You tell your story. and then they tell you what your options are, and they tell you what they think that would be the best option for you, and they tell you of the consequences, including, if they're a good lawyer, they're going to tell you about the later consequences or potential long-term effects were you to be convicted of that crime.
When earlier you had said it would these charges would stay on her record for years. When you say years, do you mean like life, or do you mean, is there a specific amount of years that it would just naturally fall off, or?
Excellent question. My belief, and I don't practice law in 50 states, only two. So in Idaho and Washington, crimes don't just drop off your record. There are, in Washington especially, there are certain mechanisms you can use if you do get convicted, if you are guilty in court. There's mechanisms that you can use years later to ask a court to throw out the conviction and take it off your record. But that does not happen automatically if you've been convicted. Now, if you've made an agreement where you didn't get convicted, and let's say it's some kind of a continuance or a deferred prosecution, they call it different things in different jurisdictions, where you avoid a conviction if you do certain things the prosecutor asks you to do, stay crime-free, pay a fee, whatever the case may be, and then they'll dismiss the case without a conviction. Then you don't have the conviction on your record. And in other places, you plead guilty, and then you can get the guilty plea withdrawn in 6 months or a year. That's called a withheld judgment. Idaho does that. And then you, once again, avoid that conviction.
Okay.
So we're talking about cases where you got the conviction, you were found guilty or pled guilty, and it went onto your record as a judgment of conviction. That's going to stay with you for some time.
Got you. Okay. So if there's a, is it fair to say then if there's a way to not plead guilty, that would be the route that's most suggestible?
I think so. I think if I have a problem with my electricity and it's sparking or something, I'm going to get advice from a good electrician before I take the next step. It's as simple as that. Just get some information so you can make a smart choice. Because it's going to be an important decision if you're been caught in the snare of the legal system.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, this is a very interesting story. Like, especially the beginning part where it's the neighbor just being nosy, watching this couple have an argument that's not necessarily violent. I mean, I wouldn't label it as violent. I don't know. I had three siblings growing up, and I can say what we did when we were growing up was violent. What she did was not. So
Yeah, well, I don't hold that against most of the people when they call the police. They're usually doing it because maybe they're afraid it's going to continue to escalate and they think they're doing the best thing to protect somebody. So I don't always view it as you shouldn't call the police. And I think that the laws were passed, domestic violence laws were passed because of brutality in the home and its effects on families and the fact that oftentimes you have a dominant person, usually a male, who is using their physical power to intimidate, frighten, control, and even physically harm a woman. And so these laws do a good job in protecting people when they're enforced. When somebody does call the police, if anybody calls the police, obviously, then the system isn't activated. But the problem is that they call it domestic violence when somebody throws an old alarm clock against the wall nowhere near their partner. It's called malicious mischief, domestic violence. And they say that that is violent, even though a lot of people would argue that throwing a clock in frustration, not anywhere near your partner, is not violent. So,
Mm.
but you can still get that domestic violence label from a malicious mischief, property damaging incident like that in your own home. And then you can get arrested or charged with domestic violence, assault or battery from an unlawful touching, even if it's just, you know, don't leave, you're drunk, don't drive the car tonight, honey, and the person holds the other person. An unlawful touching could be construed as an assault or a battery. Good prosecutors know the difference between an assault or battery that is actually an infliction of harm or control with physical harm and intent and things. That versus the incidental touchings, the stop, we've got to talk about our marriage, or don't leave, our children are here and they need you. Don't drive drunk, close the door and hold the person, or one person shoves the other out of the way, not that hard, and next thing you know, the police are called, like our case in the book. A good prosecutor will know that that is not the person that the domestic violence laws were designed to address. That's not a person that's going to escalate in a few months, is going to engage in the cycle of domestic violence and exert more power, more control. In very few cases, those kinds of incidental contact cases are not the ones where you have to worry in the future. Is this person going to seriously, intentionally harm the other party? So it becomes a net that's cast too wide,
Okay.
domestic violence laws.
And I'm glad you kind of gave the definition of violence, like you kind of touched on or gave examples of it, which I think is helpful because you're right. If you can get arrested just for throwing an alarm clock across the room, then you at least then what are your rights in that situation. The neighbor calls the police, they come over, they're asking you questions. What are your rights in Idaho and Washington if that were to happen?
In all the states, we have a right to remain silent and not talk to the police about something that we're being accused of, or there's some suspicion that we committed a crime. We can say, I want to speak to a lawyer, officer, I'm not speaking, or I have nothing to say. And that's an absolute right. The officers can't do anything about that. They could continue to try to get you to speak, and you could just say, once again, I'm not speaking about this. You can't resist an arrest, though. If they've decided they're going to take you into custody, uh, all you can really do at that point reasonably is just peaceably, calmly, cooperatively let them do their job. If they're going to put cuffs on you, they're going to. It's just going to be a question of, are they going to do it softly, or are they going to put a knee on your back because you're resisting, and then put the cuffs on very tightly? So I say cooperate, and then you'll have your opportunity to get a lawyer and have your day in court and tell your side of the story. Remain silent and be polite and cooperative.
Love it. Okay. Because in this situation, is that what you would have advised? Them like simply because if they didn't tell their story, would what would have been the probability of her still getting arrested if they would have chosen to, say, hey, I need to speak to a lawyer?
I'm not saying that I recommend somebody that is the so-called victim of a crime that they should not talk to the police. It's entirely up to them. But the person that is being accused is the one that should remain silent.
Okay.
That could be hard to determine who's the accused if two people are sort of wrestling, and maybe both of them have a reasonable belief that they could be charged with a crime, and they both want to remain silent.
Okay. Yeah, because in this particular example, she had been drinking. He was trying to stop her from driving, right? And then they went into she finally realizes he's not going to let her go anywhere. They go back in the house and they decide to get a financial planner. They worked it out, between themselves. And that's when the police arrived, right? So, I mean, and I'm just asking questions based on the, domestically nonviolent aspect of things, like, where they are, it is amicable. They are like being civil with each other. They've worked it out. It's not something that obviously, well, I don't know. We don't find out if this happens a lot. Maybe the neighbor think, maybe that poor neighbor is like, I've seen all kinds of stuff, who knows? Like the story doesn't say, it just shows this one incident. Um,
Another
but
point, you don't have to let them into your home, and that goes for anybody that is living in a home. You do not have to allow the police entry. If they believe they have emergency or what's called exigent circumstances, they can enter the home without permission or a warrant, but ordinarily they cannot enter a home without either permission to enter or a search warrant.
okay. Okay.
But just a caveat here is that if somebody is being victimized in their home, attacked, beaten, whatever the case may be, I'm certainly not advocating that in an effort to protect the abuser that they don't let the officer in the home.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Because like obviously, yeah, the domestic violence, and it's so interesting. It's so funny because the chapter before this, I think it was about the husband being the abuser, right? Or no, the wife being the abuser, I think. Or
No, you're right.
no, it was the husband. It was the husband. And so, yeah, and then this one was the woman. So it's really cool how this book really does show you different sides and different perspective of people's lives. So yeah, I love it. That I aside from finding a lawyer, a good lawyer, because kind of like, a good prosecutor or a good, or rather a good electrician was the example you had used earlier. Is there anything else that you can think of to, as far as advice wise, that you would, advise a couple in this situation, this specific scenario where they're not actually being extremely physical or violent towards one another, and they are able to like resolve things amicably? Do you think, is there any other advice that you would have for them in this kind of a situation?
Yes, well, first of all, the criminal justice system, like other systems, is essentially machinery. It just clangs along and grinds you down. And so it's a frustrating thing. And so you got to keep yourself sort of whole and strong, good self-care, and realize that it may not be fair. It may be unfair. It may be fair, but it may be unfair. And the best thing that we can do when we're thrust into situations is to learn from them so that we don't have to repeat it. Information becomes power. We learn, we address anything that's going on that led us to it in the first place, and then we don't have to repeat the same unpleasant circumstance. So just realizing that and not expecting fairness. You may get a prosecutor that just wants convictions, doesn't care about any true sides of justice.
Why would what kind of motive does a prosecutor have to, I mean, is that out of laziness or spite, or what? Why
How
would
many
a
motives you got? However many motives that you got for human beings, you can put them on defense lawyers and
just humans?
podcasters and prosecutors and everybody. There's just a wide variety of the kinds of prosecutors you're going to get. It might be somebody very inexperienced, brand new, that just, this officer brought me this case and my job is to try to get a conviction. You may get a prosecutor that knows the ropes and cares, and when they see something that they can tell isn't truly a violent person, then they will work with you. You may get a prosecutor that wants numbers, wants convictions, wants glory, wants whatever. So you just don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah, because they're humans, right? They're just like everybody else.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's great. Yeah, thank you for this. This is super helpful. Yeah, this chapter was really interesting. I really loved your different perspectives on there. Was there anything else that you want to share?
Yeah. One last thing, and that is that being in a legal situation has a similarity to being in a medical situation. So you talk to your lawyer and you're learning. In the end, you make your own decisions about your health. Some people think they just rely on the lawyer or they just rely on the doctor for what they should do for their own health, and that's just not true. These professionals are there to give you information and to educate you so that you can make the final choices and make as good a possible choice. But it's got to be your choice, because you might get a professional that's not that great, where you go to a second one, get a second opinion, and it's shockingly different from the first opinion. And you're kind of left going, oh, what's the point of having any kind of a professional? They don't even agree. And so then you go to a third and you take 2 out of 3. No, I'm being facetious. What you do is you get to know your own body. In the case of the medical problem, you get to know the situation, get educated about the situation and the consequences in the legal side, and then you make a smart choice.
Love it. Yeah, that's fantastic. Kind of taking it into your, being responsible for yourself, taking responsibility. Love it. Oh, thanks so much, Neil, for everything. And if you haven't already, make sure you go on Amazon and you can get your own copy of Hope Lines. And Neil Presley Cox does do public speaking events. If you want to go onto his website, neilpresleycox.com, you can look him up there. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Good day, everybody, and God bless.